it should be. That's my
Okay.
suggestion, be expected.
We're going to get started. For those of you who do not know who I am, I'm almost tempted to tell a joke. My name is Curtis Rivers. I'm co-owner with my wife Marie in the bookstore here. And for those that don't know, we've been in business for about 13 years. And I'm very proud of saying that we've been in business for 13 years because entrepreneurial businesses come and go like gnats. And I also like to reiterate the reason we've been in business for 13 years is because the community has supported us. We cannot stay in business unless we have that community support. So I guess this is also a plea to keep us in business and come and visit us sometime. Amen. Buy a book.
Amen.
Okay. Last 2 years ago now, the Jed Sneed and Randy Valiant and I were sitting around talking, and we were talking about how do you get issues out to the community, and we came up with an idea called the Fourth Saturday Vision Forum. And Randy will talk more about the Fourth Saturday Vision Forum. We've been doing this for approximately the last two years. And we bring in people in the community, talk about topics that are explosive.
Controversial.
Controversial topics. But Mood Makers Books also sponsors a number of different programs throughout the year. We do poetry. If you look on the wall now, this is from April, which was our poetry on the wall, which we do every year. Actually, basically what we do is take poetry and blow the poems up and put it on the wall like it's a piece of art. And it is a piece of art. So those things we do. We have all types of workshops here, and we are very open to suggestions as long as the suggestions are beneficial to the community. We don't want to do anything that's not beneficial to the community. So I would just like to say welcome to Mood Makers Books. This should be a very good forum today, and please come back. And I'll turn it over to Randy.
Thank you, Curtis. When I look out in the audience and see the rainbow, I don't even say what I've been taught over the years, which that is, when you don't have anything else to say, just say thank you. As Curtis said, this is the Fourth Saturday Vision Forum, and we came together one Saturday, three of us, and we, as Curtis said, we was wondering, how can we get it out there to the people? The people must know. And we just shot some ideas and came up with it. And as a result, the Fourth Saturday Vision Forum provides a forum for community stakeholders to expose a cross-section of our community to significant ideas and issues. We've had Mayor Duffy, we've had congressmen, we've had presidents of companies. We have a multicultural of people that came in with diverse ideas for the community to express and to incorporate ideas from our people. And there will be a question and answer session during this setting, and the purpose is to encourage individuals and institutions and organizations to share their vision for a better community. You know that we all know that in order to expand, the story must be told, is the way we look at it. So we're here today to do just that, and we want to take this time to thank you once again for all coming out and being a part. And now I'm going to turn this portion over to our speaker, the moderator for the hour, Mr. DJ Sneed.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you. We playing tag team here today, y'all. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Ms. McClain, how are you?
Good, Mrs. Lee, Harry.
I'm blessed, truly blessed. As Randy and Curtis said, today we're here at the Fourth Saturday Division Forum to discuss reparations. Should America pay? And I think all y'all got opinions, right? Yeah, y'all quiet now. Don't get you going. Everybody's got an opinion, and that's what we're keen to do, is put some ideas out there and get the community's response and get some communication and conversation and dialogue going. So that's why, again, we put together the Fourth Saturday Vision Forum. I'll just read it. It says, in connection with the 9th annual Ma'afa Day of Remembrance, hosted by the Rochester Kwanzaa Coalition, Mood Makers Books will present a panel of distinguished presenters discussing the subject, reparations, should America pay? Panelists include, to my right, Dr. Vincent F.A. Golphin. Here, is it Golphin or Golphin? Golphin, I like that better. Assistant Professor of English at Rochester Institute of Technology, Dr. Golphin is an award-winning journalist, a poet, and published author of several children, poetry, and short story books. He's a regular contributor to several national periodicals. Our other panelist is J.B. Manin. I got a call from J.B. He was in the Bronx this morning. So he said he's going to be running a little late, but he's going to be here between 2:30 and 2:45. What I shared with him was that we would go ahead and start the program, and when he got here, we would catch him up and then allow him to make his presentation. But I'm going to read his biography anyway. J. Bidiaku Menin, 35, who lives in Rochester's 19th Ward, teaches law and history at Monroe Community College. He has degrees from Michigan State and UCLA and a law degree from Queens College. He's an active marathoner and is involved in the human rights effort, having written essays on the genocide in the Sudan and other issues. He is married with no children, and you've probably seen his picture. He's a contributor. He's one of the contributors to the. He's one of the members of the board of contributors to the DNC. Yeah, good brother, JD. So again, he will be here after about 2:30, 2:45. And the way to work is Dr. Golphin will make a 10, 15-minute presentation, and then we're going to open it up to questions and or comments. I'm the moderator, so I always get to ask the first question. All right? But y'all keep your questions coming, and Dr. Golphin will either answer or we'll just dialogue amongst ourselves. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce to you Dr. Vincent F.A. Golphin. He'll make a presentation, and then we'll open up the dialogue.
Okay, well, first of all,
Well, give him a round of applause first, please.
let me do now two first of all. First of all, never clap for anybody when they start, because you don't even know if you'll like it. And then secondly, my name is Vincent. I hate that doctor junk. But those who know me, they're all excited by it and they like it, so they call me that. But I usually refer to myself as Vincent Golphin or Professor Golphin, which is what my students call me all the time. And speaking of that, I encourage all of you, I know Dejed has this forum and he has his way of doing things, but if it turns out to only be me today, let me set a few different ground rules. That any time during my early on presentation, if you have a question, you can go ahead and just ask me, raise your hand or whatever, and I'll pause and try to deal with it. My policy, the reason why I mentioned students, I said my policy, as I was telling my wife the other day, I said is that anyone can ask me anything in a respectful manner, or say anything to me in a respectful manner. And so we were joking, and she said, so if one of your students said to you, Professor Golphin, you're full of shit, you wouldn't mind that? And I said, no, as long as it's done in a very respectful manner. And so I said, if they said, Professor, respectfully, I think you're full of shit, then I said, probably, I do too. However, this is the way it is. All right? And so anyway, those are the ground rules. As far as the issue of reparations, when I was called, Curtis called me, asked me about speaking today, and I said to him, well, I'm probably going to speak in favor of it. And he was like, well, yes, defined, okay? And so I am coming out the box then, revealing my first bias, that I am in favor of the concept of reparation, that, but in saying that, there are two questions that arise. That this country, because of a long history, does owe African Americans specifically a great deal. The question is, what is owed and how will that be dealt with, okay? And thus far, most of the time when people talk about dealing with the issue of reparations, people speak in terms of some kind of an economic solution, that there should be some kind of money paid or something like that, which brings up all kinds of issues. I'll be speaking to that in a moment. And that also leads me to my second point, is that at the same time as I think reparations and stuff should be paid, I look at the present generation of African Americans, particularly those below the age of 40, and I say to myself, my God, if the government were to give every African American person $1.5 million,
Well,
would I want these people to have $1.5 million? What are they going to do with it? You know, can they make any real use of it? Okay? You know, and so that becomes a question that's going to make some, you know, in other words, the first question might make some of you whites uncomfortable. The second question is going to make some of the blacks uncomfortable. And the third question makes us all uncomfortable in the sense that, you know, we're no longer talking about one nation, one people. African Americans have to be integrated into a global scheme because the world is no longer about just one country or one culture. It's gone to beyond the point of where we have to seriously look at where African Americans are going to fit in the global scheme. And one of my theses is that African Americans are systematically being rubbed out of that scheme, okay? And so that's a part of the issue of reparations. In other words, what do I mean by that? I mean that as I look at our children, particularly in public education, they are, and when I'm saying public education all the way up, even into college, they're not being prepared, okay, to be global players. I'm talking about specifically African Americans, but I could make a broader statement if you know, if you want me to talk about that at some point. But they're not being prepared, okay? And African Americans most of all because they're being allowed to play themselves out. When you have students that aren't pushed to work up to educational standards, when you have students that choose not to go to college, when you have students that choose not to get into technical careers, you have students that come from a population which does more to end up in prison than it does to end up in business, then you're setting this population up for extinction, a form almost of genocide, okay? And that's my thesis on that. So let us roll back then to my first point here. Reparations. The reason, you know, a lot of people say, well, we shouldn't, you know, we shouldn't even be talking about reparations because there's nobody to give the reparations to. There are no slaves, okay? All the slaves are dead, so we don't know who's owed what. Now that was the first, like, counter-argument when the debate came up on reparations many, many, many years ago, as many as 20 years ago, okay? It was a renewed debate, and suddenly people were talking about, well, you know, what can be done to close this gap between that has occurred as a result of the history of slavery and the history of civil rights or segregation in America. Okay, so what could be done? How will we bridge this gap? And that concept came back to a very old concept of reparations. Why do I call it an old concept? Because ever since this country has been, ever since 1619, when in the English colonies, the first black folks rolled off the boat, there has been this concept that because we are here, because we are part of the collective then we will someday have an obligation and to share in that collective, okay? And when I use the term obligation, it's a two-sided term. With every obligation, there are also privileges. So we would have the obligation and the privilege. And that was the consciousness all the way up till about 1640. In 1640, for those of you who don't know the history already, that whole sense was changed. And it was a conscious decision made on the part of those who were in authority that people of African descent would never share in the bounty of this country. So that's why, for me, people call me a cynic, but I don't care how many Martin Luther Kings you have. I don't care how many Supreme Court decisions you have, Brown v. versus Education, Board of Education, any of that. There's never going to be equality in this society. There's never going to be the end of racism in America because people in America haven't discussed the key issue that's involved with racism. And the key issue with racism is the issue of whether people of African heritage and descent have a right to share in the bounty of this nation. It's the key, and it's not just, again, I'm speaking of African peoples today, but it's become a broader question now that we're yet wrestling with again when it comes to what they're talking about in immigration, when it comes to people from foreign countries such as the Middle East, when it comes to refugees from all parts of the world that are on their way to this country. We confront this question over and over again of who should share in the bounty of this country and how. And so in 1640, this is what happened very quickly. You're familiar with the whole thing of indentured servitude, and that's what the first blacks who came here were. They were indentured servants. And so you had, with that whole thing of indentured servitude, by British law, a term of 7 years. And people would come and they would serve. And it was a racket from the beginning because the British did not want the people who were indentured servants to live. Okay, they didn't expect them to live the 7 years. And so therefore, that's why that was a good deal for them, because they could always bring more people in the beginning. In the 17th century, they could always bring more people. Anyway, in 1640, an Irishman, a Scotsman, and a black man by the name of John Punch escaped. They were indentured servants, and they escaped, and they stole a horse, and they stole guns, and basically they took their freedom, okay? The Scotsmen, they were all captured too eventually because, again, this was, times had gotten hard. And the whole thing of indentured, the conditions for indentured people was not an easy thing. And so this was not unusual, this revolt would happen. There were many different revolts. But in 1640, that was a pivotal one, particularly the story of John Punch. Because what happened is they were captured and they were taken to court. And the Scotsman was given an additional year. The Irishman was given an additional year. And go ahead, tell it.
Wasn't he young?
No, he was made a slave for life. And that was the beginning of slavery in the British colonies. There was not the concept of slavery before, I'm talking about here before that. There was slavery in the West Indies, most certainly there was slavery other places, okay, in British holdings. But that concept was not a part of the nascent colonies here until 1640. And John Punch, if you want to say, became the first slave, okay? And so he was condemned to be a slave for life, okay? And out of that, over the next 40 years, grew an eventual practice. In other words, other colonies started, Virginia and Georgia were early on, other colonies started changing laws to make all African people slaves. Now, it would take, I could go on for 2 hours chronicling all of the legal changes that take place throughout our history reference to African Americans. But from that middle period of the 17th century on, you have a decided pattern of behavior that robs black people of the chance to own land, of the chance to own property, of the chance for manumission, in other words, the freedom over oneself, to be able to control what you do, where you do it, how you do it, and of the chance to speak freely. So, and then eventually of the chance for any form of education. And so you have this person ultimately reduced to the status of property, ultimately, and when I say ultimately at this point, I'm talking about after roughly 1820. It starts at the beginning of the 19th century, and by 1820 it becomes a necessity because you have a shift in slavery. Why do I choose that date? Let me back up for a second. In the early 1800s, and I want to say 1800, but I won't stake myself on that. In the early 1800s, it's decided that slavery should come to an end. And so therefore, the importation of slaves should come to an end. And so therefore, with the end of the importation of slaves, it becomes necessary then to turn slavery into a cottage industry, okay, which means you have to find a way to make more slaves. And all of this, when I talk about it, some people get upset with that because the way I talk about it, they said, like one lady said, well, you talk about it like it's very mechanical. Well, it was very mechanical. It was very predictable. It's about the money, honey, okay? All of this from the beginning has been about the money.
Say it again.
People didn't come here for all those plotted reasons that you hear when they tell the story of George Washington and all these people. They came here so they could get theirs, okay? And they got theirs by making sure that other people didn't get theirs, okay? They didn't have to worry about their women because they already had their women in check, okay? Basically, they couldn't own anything, they couldn't say anything, they couldn't do anything, and so they had to be in their place, okay? The black folks, once they turned them into slaves, they were property. And so black folks were actually more valuable than white women, okay? Because white women cost money, okay? Black people made money, okay? And a slave was valuable, okay? You could have a guy like this right here, you know, you're about 20, 21 years old. He's tall, he's strong, you got nice white teeth, okay? $1,500 easy. Easy, okay? Because you can work it, okay? You can't work something like me, okay? Old, fat, tired, missing teethers, okay? Got rheumatoid arthritis, okay? That means you're only gonna work but so hard, okay? Huh?
You can read.
Oh, yeah, we wouldn't even have that, okay? But if I could read, because the slaves didn't all come from Africa like blank slates. See, people teach that, but that's not true, okay? And so the slaves were not stupid people. In fact, that's why we have a culture. That's why our culture as African Americans is a unique culture. And I don't want to go too far on that, but let me just tell you, all you have to do is sit down with a room full of Africans, and they will tell you that they do not think of themselves as African Americans, okay? And I had that discussion a few weeks ago. I'm sitting here with a room full of people. It's called the Organization of African Students. You know how many out of the 30 people in that room were from Africa? 3. The rest of them never seen Africa, could barely spell Africa, ain't never been to Africa, okay? But they consider themselves Africans because they have, quote unquote, African parentage. Well, theoretically, we have African parentage. And when I say that we, I'm including everybody in the room. God knows who's been sleeping with who and what's been up with what. And so you can't necessarily define it in those kinds of strict categories anymore. Because race has never been about parentage in this country. Race has always been about the perception of color.
Say it again, Vincent.
Okay.
Say it again. That race is about color.
It's been about the
and not
perception
race.
of color. It's political. It's not biological.
Amen.
Okay?
Amen.
Because if we, like I always tell people that, when I talk about white, okay, I talk about white because white is a political term. There is no such thing as white. Before there was this country, there was not a perception of white. All the people that came here from Western Europe, okay, were English, German, Scottish, Irish, reel them off, French, whatever.
Good.
They thought of themselves Spanish, they thought of themselves from all those different countries, okay? They got over here and they couldn't line up to be white fast enough. There's a fascinating book, if you ever get a chance to read it, How the Irish Became White. Because you see, when they first came here, they weren't considered white either. I'm talking about the real Irish people, not the fancy Irish people that came in the 1670s. I'm talking about the ones that came after 1840, the real Irish folks, the ones that were over in Ireland being starved to death by the British.
Well,
More than 1 million Irish people died in a Holocaust. Oh, really? Okay. But anyway, more than 1 million of those folks died in a Holocaust over there before 1850. Okay? And when they came here, they were desperately running, looking for not only a better life, but looking for survival. So what happened to that mentality today? What happened to those folks who came over here and they joined this country? Well, my theory on that, I talk about something called the cultural contract, that there is an American cultural contract, okay? And the cultural contract is simply this, that if you're going to be a part of this culture, there are certain things you have to do. Richard Pryor, I think it could have been somebody else, established a joke that basically, if you want to be an American, the first thing you have to learn is to say the word nigger, okay?
yeah.
Because that's a part of the cultural contract, okay? And unfortunately, the African people and the Caribbean people and the Asian people and everyone who comes here, they learn that. That's the first thing they learn, that those people over there, you don't have to respect them. You don't even have to like them. You can step on them, kick them, push them out of the way. They don't mean nothing, okay? Shoot one, a cop won't care, okay? File a complaint against one. They're probably guilty of something anyway, okay? And so people learn this. It becomes a part of the fabric of our society, just as there are so many other things that become part of the fabric of our society. And so then what happens after that is we move into the experience of this sort of, not ignorance of, but it really becomes an ignorance after a while, but ignoring the impact of racism. Anytime history changes, like for example, today we have some people, it didn't just start this year, but we have people who are really pushing hard to say that the Holocaust never happened. You got people with PhDs running around in Canada and other parts of the world writing books saying that Jews were never killed, that there were never 6 million Jews in all of Europe, so it's impossible. You got people that are writing books, black and white, saying that slavery really wasn't that bad. Like one white guy that was on one of these conservative shows was really funny. He has, his thesis was that they did the African people a favor. Because look how they would have been if they had stayed in Africa. Look at what their lives would have been. So they should be happy to be here. Because look at how happy their lives are here, okay? And how much they have, all right?
You're saying that in the context of the present or the past?
The present, this was something that was on the radio last year. This guy wrote this book, and he was talking, and he was serious as a heart attack.
It's not a new theory. It's not a new theory.
Oh, I know that, but I'm just laughing because it's just, what would even make you think that when you look at, like, for example, these posters, when you're done here, you have posters about slave catchers and kidnappers and announcing a Negro for sale and that kind of thing. What would have a person go through an experience like that and not be affected by it? What would have a people think that you can have a people pass through an experience like that in 350 years of that kind of an experience and not be changed by it? And then we're not even talking about another 54 years of legal segregation. So when you're talking about the effect of 300 plus years of slavery, you're talking about the effect of 50 years of legal segregation, and then you talk about where we are today, where we have the ongoing presence of oppression and violence against a race based on their color. based upon purely the perception of color, okay, then what is that going to do to an individual? How do you repair that? You know, saying you're sorry is the first step. Bill Clinton tried to do that, folks just went berserk. Okay, how dare you apologize for slavery? How could he do that? How weak he is to apologize for slavery. He's being duped by black people because, you know, into saying something like that. There's no need to apologize for slavery because we didn't do nothing. That's the new camp. We didn't do nothing. Actually, they don't say we didn't do nothing. They say we did nothing. Okay, we were not slave owners. We were not this. We were not that. What's being missed in such public discourse, as the intellectuals call it, basically it's just like what's being missed in all that jabber is this, is that this country was not only founded on the promise of British law to indenture slaves for 40 acres, by the way, that's what they were promised, a mule and a horse. I mean, excuse me, a horse or mule and a gun. That was the initial promise to those who were indentured servants all the way back in the 17th century. That was the promise given to African Americans again right after the Civil War. So it wasn't that this promise went away. It wasn't that people forgot and said African Americans didn't deserve it. It was that when these people were freed from slavery, even Abraham Lincoln was convinced that something needs to be done. There has to be a start. And actually, it wasn't Lincoln that came up with the formula, 40 acres and a mule. They didn't talk about giving them guns. They came up with the formula, 40 acres and a mule. William Sherman, who was put in charge of the Reconstruction effort in the South, General William Sherman, okay, was the person who was responsible for that. And he was like, well, what can we do? What can we do? Okay? They thought originally of creating Black America. In other words, like a separate place for black people in this country. And that they would have all black people live together. If you want to look up how that was working and something akin to that, read it should still be in print, but you can look it up on the internet. It's called the Port Royal, R-O-Y-A-L, Port Royal Experiment. That's the name of the book that goes with it, the Port Royal Experiment. But anyway, it refers to Port Royal, South Carolina, which was one of the sea islands off of South Carolina. And what happened is you had, you know that slaves were called contraband during the Civil War. So you had all this contraband running around. And people decided, well, wait, we just can't have slaves running everywhere. This is just crazy. And so they gathered them all up. They took them to Port Royal Island. And what they did was people from the American Mission Society and the Methodist Church came down to teach them and, you know, to try to organize them. And so they did. And what Port Royal became was an all-black city. Totally self-sufficient, totally everything, with its own laws and run by black people. Okay? The war ended, and so did the experiment. All right? But that was something that was debated, because Lincoln was pointing to that as, look, this is a possibility. We could simply let them all live by themselves, and they would have this, they would have the chance to develop in this manner. And Sherman wanted to compromise basically with his theory. And again, when I'm giving key names on these things, these are long debates. None of this happens like that. These are very long, complicated debates that get settled in certain ways. But Sherman was the one, with his march to the sea and his control of the southern territory, who came up with the idea that, okay, let's try this 40 acres and a mule. And in some places they did. It was never fully implemented because Abraham Lincoln died. When Lincoln died, everything got smashed into a cocked hat, and it was just ridiculous. It was just, everything went flat. Okay, Reconstruction went a whole, yes.
Dr. Goffin, can we do this, kind of summarize your position, and then we're going to open it up to questions and answers, you know,
Okay.
from the, okay, if you could summarize kind of
No
your
problem.
position.
Summarizing my position, I wish I could have got to the black part. Okay. Summarizing my position is this, is that, first of all, I don't think money alone is real reparations, okay? Because what is owed in this country is to give not only African Americans, but all Americans equal footing, which is to say we're going to have to tear this country up and start all over again. Because the basic principles, and that's not just rhetoric. I'm talking about if you want to solve the problem, this is how you're going to have to solve it. Because, first of all, number one, we have to have a confrontation over the real history of African Americans, which means that throughout this nation, there must be a thorough and open discussion on the effects of slavery and the effects of African American history on the conditions today. And when I say open, I'm saying both sides have to be honest. African Americans have to be honest about how they feel, what they experience, and how they think, and they have to be listened to. And others who aren't African American have to be involved in the dialogue, and they have to be listened to also. So there has to be that, number one. And why? Because so many people don't believe that racism exists anymore, white and black, okay? You have a lot of these black people who go off to college, they graduate college, and they think that they can get a job if they just go around and say that they never saw racism. They ain't seen no problems, their life has been wonderful, and that's it. Now, that's probably true in some cases, many cases. I haven't had a horrible life where I was like, I used to joke and say, well, I was born a poor black child. But that was like so far from the truth, okay? I've had a really nice life. But going back to the era of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, that's what they were trying to get us to understand more than anything else, is that individualism for all of us is not the guide toward the future. Just because my life has been something doesn't mean that I don't have a corresponding relationship with others in my culture and others in this country, which is a whole other thing, okay? And so, as King would have said, I say that as long as there is someone else who is not free, then I am not free. Okay, as long as there is someone whose rights are impinged, my rights are impinged. As long as there is someone who doesn't have opportunity, I don't have opportunity. And that's the only way that we can leverage that in this country, is for people to begin to take such a stand. Because the opportunity is there, and that's the third question on rampant capitalism. We have to begin to decide, what are we going to do? Right now we have literally laissez-faire, rampant capitalism. Do whatever you like. You don't have to share with anybody. You can get as much as you like. And it's led us to an era, unprecedented era of greed. Okay? And greed on the one hand, materialism, coupled with strident individualism on the other hand, it's a bad combination. Because if the only thing that I care about is my profit, then that means that I don't care about you. So if you have 20 bucks that I want, ain't no big thing for me to kill you. Okay, because it's about me and the 20 bucks. It's not about you. And so, we have bred, and when I say we, I'm talking about my generation, that first civil rights generation, those born before 1954, we have now bred almost 2 generations of people who think that way. That's going to be dangerous.
Yes, sir.
There it is. But I'm saying it's going to be dangerous because the hard times are just beginning.
Amen.
These are not the hard
Amen.
times.
Amen.
Okay?
True.
Some people say, oh, we're already in hard times. No, this is just the beginning.
Beginning of woe.
Okay? Globally, because again, we live globally. And so globally, you have poverty rising. Globally, you have violence on the rise. Globally, you have ignorance or lack of education on the rise, okay? And globally, you have desperation on the rise. You're going to have, we talked about, and I just mentioned refugees and that kind of thing. And I promise, after I make this point, I'll stop talking. But I mentioned refugees and stuff. Refugees, people all over the world now are flowing to the food, okay? It's not even about that whole thing of, well, I just want to have 2 cars in the garage anymore. It's about, look, I'm sitting over here in Sudan, it's hot, and I'm starved. And people are dying all around me, okay? Over there in San Diego, there's food. I'm not gonna stay in Sudan, not if I can get out, okay? And so you're going to have all over Europe, you're going to have all over the United States, you're going to have all over Canada and the rest of the G8 nations. People coming, hungry people coming, poor people coming, and that's the discussion that's being disguised by all this stuff about the talk about Mexican immigrants. It's not about Mexican immigrants. It's not about a war on terror. It's a war on people of color, because globally it is the people of color who are most impacted. Not only people of color are impacted, but most impacted by poverty, violence, and disease. Done.
The way we'll work is I'll ask the first question, then if you would raise your hand if you have a comment, and then I'll call on you so we have some sense of order. I want to thank Vincent for all of those comments, and lots of thoughts and lots of things that he said made sense to me. I read once where it said, a lie told again and again, becomes the accepted lie until you can't remember it's a lie. It never stops being a lie, but you talk about it and you say it so many times, you forget that it's the accepted lie and not the truth. When you mentioned about racism being based on color, not biology, the history of the concept of racism is a fascinating study in and of itself. It's not biologically based, it's based on perception. It's based on, do you appear to be white, do you appear to be black, do you appear to be this, appear to be that?
But when you get into it fully in this country, it's based on profit, because they had to have a way of distinguishing. There was a concept in the beginning, you know, a lot of people think, well, okay, they learned about the whole thing of during the times of deep slavery, that blacks and whites were forbidden to wed and have babies and that kind of thing. All that was considered taboo. But yet during the time of the early, like I say, let's say before 1740, during that early time, before that, when blacks and whites and Native Americans were indentured servants, okay, they were encouraged to get together and have children and that kind of thing. Because every time one of your servants would have a child, in other words, you get one more servant, you get increase, you get more land. So, and it wasn't just black people. I mean, there's a famous, is this,
Go ahead. Yeah, this is JB, but go
okay,
ahead.
do you want to let him have?
I will. Go ahead, finish.
Anyway, you got more land. There's the famous story of Antonio the slave, one of the 1619 people. His last name was John. Well, he took the name Johnson, Anthony Johnson. So you'll hear it referred to sometimes. Settled in, had land in Maryland and Virginia, and farms in both places. And he increased his land holdings, his acreage, because for every new slave you would get, not slave, but servant, you would get 50 acres. Okay? So that's why people encouraged people of different races to marry then, but eventually it became too hard to handle. And so slavery was a practical solution to who would work. First of all, getting Indians to work was always a problem because they would run away. If they ran away, you wouldn't chase them because they know the land better than you do. So that's a practical difficulty. Okay? Whites, no offense, were not strong enough. Okay? They couldn't adapt. They were not strong enough to be able to do the kind of labor. And this is not just in the British colonies. The same thing happened in the Spanish colonies, because the British learned this from the Spanish, that the best workers were the Africans. You didn't have to feed them that much. They would work from sun up to sundown. They were strong beyond belief. And these are part of the mythology. Strong beyond belief. You couldn't kill them if you wanted to. Okay? And so, not only, and again, the Spaniard, if you want to know, that developed this concept was a Spanish monk by the name of De las Casas. Okay? And he put his, it's not exact science, I mean, he did empirical science. He observed slaves and he began to say, well, you know, Africans were bred to be slaves because he wasn't entirely certain that they were human beings. He wasn't entirely certain that they had souls. So throughout the 16th and 17th century, you even had a debate going on throughout Catholicism, even into the 18th and 19th century, but that's a whole other story, as to whether black people actually had souls, or whether they really were just animals, or whether their souls were like white people's souls. So that, because there was this notion to maintain religion, and religion is one of the rocks of a human society. It always will be, in every human society. But the fact of the matter is, profit became greater rock here. So guided by profit, and when you follow the history, you find that color became, well, first it started with blood, the notion of black blood. And that's where it all started, that somehow blood was different. And so there was this, and the blood always led to color. But eventually what happened is the blood didn't lead to color. So when you had people who looked like you, who were black, you know, I mean, like your grandmother might have been, or even your mother might have been, okay? Then there was a problem, because you had to begin to exclude those folks from society, and so they were excluded from society by saying, look, if you only have even one drop of black blood, okay, and there's a great book by Scott Malcolmson called One Drop of Blood, okay, that gives the entire history of the one drop experience and what that was. He includes the legal stuff that I'm not throwing in there. Because actually, most of the laws of racial exclusion, and you're the other guy?
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll probably disagree with this. If you do, that's fine. But my research has shown me that most of the legislation that dealt with racial exclusion, other than that early stuff in the Constitution, didn't refer to black people. Those things were, most of that legislation was created for the Chinese. Okay, and blacks had already been eliminated, Native Americans had already been eliminated from the formula, and so you had Chinese laborers who came in the 19th century, the late 19th century, into the 20th century, and you had Latin people, Mexicans or other people, and you had a few people from, not Middle East, but South Asia, okay, East Indians, et cetera, et cetera. And there has never been a legal definition of what is black, by the way. The only thing that is legally defined is what is white, okay? And that was the whole thing, is that if you did not correspond to the definition of whiteness, you could not even be an American citizen. So laws were created to exclude them from citizenship in America, which meant, again, sharing legally in the bounty of the country. And then also at the same time, excluding them economically to the lowest rungs, where they would have to be the workers, et cetera, because they could never get a foothold. They could never own vast tracts of land and things like that. Now that had already been done to the African Americans before the late 1800s, and then it was done again in the late 1800s after slavery, as you had the attacks on black towns. You know, some people in the early, they've seen the movie Rosewood, which takes place in 1930, okay? But there were many Rosewoods, okay? I did a piece once on a place called Sherman, Texas, where exactly the same thing took place. And to this day in Sherman, Texas, no black professionals live in that town. At one time, Sherman had black doctors, lawyers, school teachers, principals, everything, shop owners, et cetera, et cetera. Now they still have those people today, it's just that they don't live in Sherman. And it's because of what happened back in 1825.
Vincent, let me go ahead and introduce to the members. This is our other panelist, J.B. Manin, and he will be addressing the concept and the topic of reparations. Thank you and welcome, J.B.
I'm going to sit over here and let you.
Dr. Manin.
Just in general, So the doctor here has given a lot of good insight in regards to the history and the purpose of reparations. I'm coming from my own personal perspective here. I'm an attorney, also a professor. I teach history and law in Geneseo. I also do criminal defense law. But the issue of reparations to me is an issue that every person of conscience has to be aware of. First of all, I want to say that there is precedent for having reparations. Actually, before I even start there, let me go back into a definition of reparations. I'm sure the good doctor has given you something to go with. But reparations, all it means is to repair, to make whole, to reconstitute something that has been broken down. And that's something that has been lost, rather. That is something that happened to the person of African descent in this nation, but not only us, but any person of color has been affected, unfortunately, by the expansion of explorers from Europe. Particularly, we can look at Native Americans. We can also look at the history of the Jews in Europe. We can look at what happened with the Japanese during World War II. There has been precedent for folks to receive compensation, both monetarily and physically, to repair what has been lost or stolen or taken or misplaced. However you want to define it, there has been precedent for reconstitution of the entire community. So what African Americans today are arguing for and demanding is nothing new. And it has been rewarded not only by foreign governments, i.e. Germany and others of that sort, but also by our own American government. If we look at what happened, just bear with me for a second here, if we look at what happened with the Japanese during World War II. As we all know, that was a battle, U.S. Thought that Japanese on the western coast might be likely to align their allegiances with the Japan versus America. They shipped them from their homes without any type of warning or any type of preparation given to them to pick up their belongings, and said essentially, because we're in a wartime situation, we believe that you guys are a threat to our national security. And thus they were transported by train and by other venues to further west, I believe Utah, Nevada, what have you. But anyhow, they were displaced for sometimes months, sometimes years, what have you. To make a long story short, please.
No, I was just going to say, not to cut in on you, I'm sorry, but the other issue there too is in many cases their property was given away or sold.
Absolutely. So even when they did come back after the war ended, they came back to nothing. Absolutely. I'm just trying to do a case for precedent here. So we're looking at essentially 1940s, during World War II, what have you, and the Japanese were displaced, removed forcibly from the land, property, possessions were taken, property was sold, and so on. After the fact, they did sue the United States government. They did make civilly, what have you. They were given money. I believe it was a total of $20,000 per living family member, sibling, what have you, by the U.S. government. The U.S. government said we made a wrong, right? And we need to repair it. So what the push for here in the African-American context has been done before. If we look at what happened in Germany, of course, with the Jews, in terms of the number that stated is about 6 million folks who were killed during World War II. They have made proceeded a legal venue to recoup monies and property that was lost as well during World War II. They as well have been compensated by the Germans and also by American corporations, so forth and so on. So all I'm trying to say here, my introductory statement, is that what African Americans are pushing for is not unprecedented, right? Where you have a situation where your belongings, where your essentially your life, where your years of most valuable service to our society are taken, not asked for, but taken, without your okay, there should be some type of repair process. Let me give you another example. Let's look at what's happening right now in South Africa. South Africa is a great symbiotic relationship, in some ways good, some ways bad, with the history of America, with the history of the African in America. Look at what happened and Reconciliation Committee, TRC. The whole purpose of this committee is trying to have folks heal, have the nation heal itself, right? It was led by Desmond Tutu and others of that type of notoriety in South Africa. It brought together people like you and I here, people who have done wrongs, people who have been wronged. It brought them, it said, we want to create a forum, right, for you to vent your frustration, to essentially own up to what you did, right, to the other person. We want this person to also hear what you did, essentially to be able to forgive you if they want to, but essentially it's a way to negate the legal toll that you owe to society, right? Once again, another example of a nation who is progressive in nature, thinking and exercising ways to heal ourselves, heal themselves, and to create a bond of society. What I'm arguing is that in America, we have yet to truly wrestle with the issues of slavery. We have yet to truly come to a position of holding our national government accountable for the wrongdoings it did from we can go back to 1500s and beyond. Okay, and so in order for us to move forward collectively as a nation, as a community, as a group of folks who are truly engaged in trying to be a collective, we have to start with a process of understanding ourselves as equals. Until we have a situation where black folks, even if it's not completely monetary, but in some way, shape, or form, acknowledge the fact that a wrong has been done against an entire nation of folks, and the national government sees that there needs to be a way to recompensate or reheal or reconnect this group of folk which has been perfectly disconnected from the other, we cannot continue as a full nation. Not in the same spirit as our quote-unquote forefathers have stated in the Constitution, so forth and so on, all people being equal. How do I see reparations played out in the U.S. context? So I see it merely as a monetary payment. There's been much discussion about this. People are saying, why do you just, what would happen if you got just a paycheck? Black folks are wasted. They go to the liquor store, they go to, whatever.
Cadillac.
Exactly.
Cadillac.
Go to the mall, what have you. They go whatever, buy material items, so forth and so on. First and foremost, that is not.
Can we just qualify it a little bit and say many would, not necessarily all, but no, I made the same point you did, but I think that's definitely an issue that you've raised.
And that's just not even saying that's a stereotypical response, a knee-jerk reaction, right? In terms of money is going to be fleeting, it's going to go away, right? And so is that all you're fighting for? Essentially, it's a paycheck, right? And then people are saying, what would that paycheck look like? Can you even estimate, calculate the amount of monies that was lost during this free labor? Over 450 years of indenture. I would say, not indenture service, but 450 years of free labor that continues to this day. The ramifications of that slavery. Can you actually add that up and put it into a quantifiable number? All I'm trying to say is there's many arguments first of all, against reparations, right? Number one. Second of all, in terms of what shape that will look like, whether it be pure monetary payment, whether it be grants for college, whether it be land, and so on. But to tell you the truth, to me, those are all distractions. The fact is, we have to look at the substantive question of, are we interested in helping a part of this nation repair itself to become part of the whole? We can talk about the details. I can come up later, but we have to be able to answer the big question. I think a lot of these other issues are distracting. Keep the ball moving, keep people, not focused on the real issues at hand. But it's really, then when we start talking about accountability by the government, obviously we're talking about monetary payment potentially, we're talking about trillions of dollars, we're talking about folks who have had their hand in the cookie jar for generations, having to own up for what they've done, so on. So the folks, unfortunately, who have done many other wrongs in the past, their generations, new generations actually, ancestors are now playing the role of gatekeeper, unfortunately, for us to move forward collectively. So my point is this: when we go to reparations, we cannot get distracted on what it'll look like in terms of detail. This definitely has to be a conversation that's going to be had for sure, but we have to stay focused on the big picture here. Should this nation be held accountable for its wrongdoings? Should a group of folks who have been beaten down, trashed, humiliated, dehumanized, be given a platform to rebuild themselves, right? Are we as a nation concerned about coming together collectively and truly building community? Are we truly interested in equality? We talk about this big picture items that have been talked about from the days, as the doctor mentioned earlier, as the days of the founding of this nation. This is supposedly the backbone of why we're here today. But we all know historically that when they talk about equality, we talk about inclusiveness, we're not talking about people of color. We should all know that. We should know that, unfortunately, the times that people were living in the early 1800s when the Declaration of Independence was created, when they talk about equality for all, we were talking about the folks who were at the meeting place, people who were highly educated, white men, property owners, and so on, people who could pay taxes. This is who we're talking about here. So even from our nation's language in the most highly quoted constitution in the world, we have to be cognizant of the fact is that we have to revisit this language. We have to revisit the time period. We have to revisit the context about when, how, and why this information was created. It can't be taken out of context. And for us to move forward as a nation collectively, we have to be able to research. The doctor was mentioning earlier, we have to be able to research our history and understand it fully to be able to move forward collectively.
Amen. Let's do this because it's about 1:15 right now, and we do want to open it up. I think people will have questions. Vincent, I had started, but I didn't ask my question. I had started. I know, that's all right.
All right.
Here's my question, and after that we can open it up. Will reparations in any form given
downtown, African American, will it heal or will it destroy America? In any
about reparations means to repair. Will that repair this nation or will it destroy this nation? To both of the panelists.
I think